So it's such a pleasure to introduce these two authors. And I want to start by saying my grandmother used to say that you can't have two centerpieces on one table. But I think tonight may prove her wrong because we have two heavyweight champs with us tonight, that's for sure. So first is Lyn Sharratt, the well-renowned practitioner, researcher, and author who earned her street credibility by working with and raising the achievement for some of the world's most vulnerable students all over the world. Her expertise is widely sought after, and requests for her support stretch from Canada to Chile to Norway. Recently, she co-developed the Clarity Learning Suite, a web-based professional learning opportunity with the mantra of everyone is a leader, because helping to make continuous school improvement into a reality is core for Lyn's work. And for all those who participate, they do get to experience what it's like to, as you will see today, put faces on the data and so much more.
Thanks,
Tonight's other centerpiece is Michael Fullan, who has also earned his place on the short list of great minds in education. His influence travels the globe, and luckily for the globe, he has little interest in slowing down. He is currently hard at work, continuing to pen bestseller books in the field and share his principles for new pedagogies for deep learning as the movement's global leadership director. So tonight, Sharratt and Fullan have come together to share updates on their seminal work, Putting Faces on the Data. It has been 10 years since the first edition was published, and like true scholars, they want to make sure this pivotal work continues to meet the needs of today's teachers and leaders. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the duo that you all came to see and hear from, Michael and Lyn.
Thanks so much, Tanya, and thanks as well to Morgan and the team at Corwin. It's always a pleasure to work with that team. We took the phrase or the, I guess, quote from chapter 2 in Faces and put it right up front in the beginning of our book because it actually really describes what we're talking about. We're talking about all of us seeing the lovely faces that are in front of us who are in our care. And it's really a pleasure to work with Michael and think about our work together and our wonderings.
Let me build on this. On the screen, it's the how did we get started? So first decade of this century, Lyn was the head of curriculum for the York Region District School Board, which is just north of Toronto. It had about 140 schools at the beginning. And by the time we were doing work, it was 180. So highly multicultural, being the curriculum director. And then I was the outside consultant enabler. We worked together for 10 years. And my motto already now is 80% of the best ideas comes from leading practitioners. So Lyn was a leading and is a leading practitioner. So we teamed up together. We wrote the first book, Clarity, and then the one on Faces that came out in 2012. We'll say more about the evolution of this as we get into these slides, but this came from practice, and it was reinforced with the workshops that Lyn and I did independently and together to keep proving it and adding to it, which we'll get to when we talk about the second edition. Just a comment on, we asked Michael Barber, Sir Michael Barber, to do the foreword. He was, we worked with him, and it was really a fantastic connection because Michael was a pioneer in literacy in the sense that he was Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of England, the Tony Blair's chief advisor for literacy and numeracy in this same decade that we were talking about, earlier than that, but building into this decade. So Michael has written a book in his own right that's fabulous. It's called Accomplished, because he was applying his work not only to education, but also to other sectors of the society. So we've had the fortune of teaming up, learning from their first effort at literacy, which was 1997 to early 2000s. We built on it. We became close pioneers, and his foreword is worth reading as an article.
Yeah, absolutely.
New in this new edition, what would you say, Lyn?
No, well, there's lots new. I think we've decided we've really written a new book. Our first book, Realization, led to us wondering, what about those students who are at risk? And we wrote Putting Faces on the Data. And now we certainly have written, and we've written Putting Faces on the Data, and we've extended that subtitle to include teachers, what great teachers and leaders do. So in the book, we have case studies, brand new case studies. However, we've kept the old ones because they are important as well. We put them in a QR code, so we haven't lost that integrity of our first book. We've certainly added to it new graphics, new vignettes. Our content, I think, is clearer and sharper. We've looked at what it takes to lead this work through our leadership skills, and we really come up with new content that focuses on precision in practice. And on the screen is just one of the deliberate pauses throughout the book. There are many that ask key questions for you to ponder with your staff or your teams.
So these research questions we will answer, but I want to put a different face on it right now. Face on faces which is that we'll mention this later, that the new book, the 10th anniversary edition, is twice as large, or twice the size of the first edition, and that's not because quantity is everything. It's just because the examples kept piling up. When more and more people wanted to do it, we were adding those, we were getting more precision. One of my new concepts is specificity without imposition. Think of that as a change concept, specificity without imposition. So there's a lot of concepts that are vague, so they miss specificity. Therefore, people fill in the blanks and it's hard to focus. Or somebody tries to require the specificity within a top-down way, and then it backfires from a change process point of view. So this is heavily connected, the data and the ideas, and coming from the field, and the leadership skills that we want to talk about. They're actually, Lyn mentioned the initial three, but we're going to build on them as we go through the seminar.
And I really want to build on that specificity, not imposition. This work is for everyone in systems and schools to improve the specificity of knowing the faces. And so we share our 14-parameter conceptual framework, and it comes out of the research that we did with over 500 participants. And I remember Michael saying, don't put the 14 parameters in a list. Well, there they are on the right in a list in our first chapter. But as well, we've looked at the work that Robin Thompson has done in analyzing the 14 and doing a gap analysis of what the 14 are about, and then what's happening in her particular school. So the 14 parameters, we sharpened the language, but never changed the intent. And I think it's an excellent tool to use as a gap analysis over the work you're doing in your systems and in your schools.
Yeah, I remember just before we get into NPDL, Lyn, when we had 13, and we had that discussion about we were kind of pro participation, so we shied away from accountability as an explicit concept. But you'll notice the 14th one is shared responsibility and accountability. Yes. And this has come to be a good anchor, because now we can have, with the specificity without imposition, you can have accountability without imposition. And that's what you need. You need the accountability built into the culture, not into the external checking up. So that was a key breakthrough to round it out.
That was, and as I recall, we were already through realization. We had written 5 chapters and we were into our 6th chapter when you said, I think there's one missing. And I said, there can't be one missing. We've written 5 chapters of the book. So Jill Marr in chapter 6 of Realization, our first book, helped us find and define the 14th parameter. So as Michael says, parameter 1 and 14 are the bookends. All students, shared belief and understanding, it's about all students. That's an equity and excellence issue for us. And it's about responsibility that then leads to accountability without imposition. So absolutely, that's a great story.
Just a footnote for NPDL, which is the other major initiative I'm involved in with Joanne Quinn. I can't explain this framework, and I don't want to take the time in detail, but this is very compatible with FACES. It's the core part of it is about the 6 C's in terms of character, citizenship, collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. So we've got the 6 global competencies, but we've got the same, I guess I'll say, pedagogy that's in FACES is in the deep learning model. And in another time, we will have a seminar explaining what's happening in the 20 countries that are implementing this model. I just wanted to reference it because it's totally compatible with FACES, but it gets into the 6 competencies more explicitly. So keep that as something in mind for when we get around to it in the next few months.
Excellent.
So Lyn, you should know this because you're so much at the elbow of practitioners.
Yeah.
How are they using it?
I just know that the reaction of people who do our work is really captured at the beginning of the new FACES when we have endorsements. There are people from around the globe that we both work with and know well. And I guess what's exciting for us is the real practicality of FACES, that it's for leaders, for teachers, it's for those who care about and care for our students, knowing every face and how to teach each one. And in one of the schools that I work in, one of the jurisdictions that I work in, Bell State School is kindergarten to year 10 school. And they've really captured their work with FACES. So have a listen and they see if you can identify those 14 parameters that they weave into this conversation about their school improvement work.
At Bell State School, we have a small, highly experienced and agile teaching team. In 2017, we asked, how do we align our combined expertise, ideas, and passion to deliver the best school we can? Sharratt and Fullan's 14 parameters provided the structure. Through the framework, we have already enacted many changes. A whole school pledge to prioritise literacy, a daily quarantined literacy block, data-driven teaching and case management practice, improved community outreach through social media, notice boards, and cross-agency collaboration. And we are beginning peer-to-peer sharing of best practice through video vignettes and in-class observation. By providing a holistic, but most importantly, practical framework, the 14 parameters have seen our shared vision for better outcomes translate into direct and meaningful action. This transformation has delivered a more cohesive and effective approach to school improvement, but more meaningfully, it ensures every student is empowered to achieve. At Bell, we are proud of how far we have come along our improvement journey, and we are energised to, in the words of Lyn Sharratt, do the work urgently, so every child may have the chance to be the best they can be.
So that really summarizes for us how the 14 parameters are a very practical and strategic concept that we can use to really do that gap analysis, but also use the 14 as a lens over what we're doing now, what we need to do next, and so on. One of the other practicalities in FACES is looking at assessment literacy. And what is assessment literacy? We start our chapter on assessment, chapter 3, with a case study. And from that case study, we pull out the 10 lessons that we've learned about assessment literacy. And to us, it is all about equity and excellence. And captured in that chapter as well, we've added the assessment waterfall chart. And it always starts with what students already know about a concept in a unit of study, and then what the curriculum expectations are that translate into student-friendly learning intentions, visible for all students. From those learning intentions, we develop co-constructed success criteria, so students know how to be successful in this particular unit of study. From that, we give descriptive feedback, but only against the success criteria, because that's what's known to students. And they get descriptive feedback and get involved as well in peer and self-assessment, always against the success criteria. The ultimate in assessment literacy is students setting their own goals for learning against those success criteria. And for us, that defines putting faces on the data. And it's only when we can do that assessment data collection that we then can look at what instructional strategies will we need to apply so that students can learn in a meaningful way and own their own goals for learning. So this assessment waterfall chart really informs the instruction that we look at in each of our classrooms.
So it's a bit odd for an author to talk about why it's so popular, but so I won't go overboard on this, except to say I think the features of it, as you already know from this discussion, is so heavily grounded in practice. It's coming from the practitioners. It's fairly comprehensive, the approach to it, but it's succinct. There's no extra thinking about it. And it's timely now in 2022 that even though things are disruptive, we could talk in another way about the difficulty of getting to be able to focus. But this is something that's really connected to the practice so closely that it doesn't leave practice; it builds on it. And when it's being used by practitioners, and the word spreads from them, not from us so much, but from them. That's why it gets additionally popular. And then Lyn does, especially, I would say, almost hundreds of workshops. And the workshop is a way of not disseminating the ideas, a little bit of that, but proving them, getting more ideas, more insights. And we will welcome questions at the end, the last 15 minutes. There were well over 1,000 people that signed on for this. Just looking at the chat, generally speaking, there's well over 100 now comments in the chat. So we will take some of those at the end, but we'll also take, I'm going to say, all the chat to ourselves, the chat comments, and afterwards try to decipher more learning from it. So it's a going concern, and it's great to work so closely with practitioners.
Thanks, Michael. And I'm just going to end our thinking about the practicalities of FACES and what assessment literacy looks like by listening to a few of the teachers at O'Connor Catholic Collegiate. And I guess what I want to, and we're not going to hear the whole thing because all of the teachers had something meaningful to say. So just a little bit about how this work not only applies to elementary schools, primary, but also indeed secondary schools. So just have a listen to the beginning with leaders and teachers talking together about how collaboration really informs their practice.
Really important that we work to meet the needs of the kids in our classroom so that everyone achieves success and everyone can reach their own learning goals.
I think we needed to change because one of the things that we were noticing were students weren't really grabbing why they were learning things.
We looked at some of the trends that are happening around the world and some of the successes. So, and it was found that we needed to make some pedagogical changes to cater for learners in the 21st century.
So there's been a large focus on differentiation in order to increase and maintain student engagement.
Well, since we've started this journey, there's been a distinct increase in professional development of teachers, especially around pedagogy.
I have seen teachers be more active learners, which is exciting because no longer are we expecting to use the same tests or the textbooks that we were once using. We are now adapting to what our students' needs are to make them more engaged in the classroom, which is our job.
So now we have learning intentions and success criteria embedded in our programs and in every lesson. Students are really aware of what's required of them in every single lesson, not just for an entire unit of work.
The fact that I have a lot more ownership and I know what we're learning about. And yeah, compared to like your 7 to 10, you know what you have to know and get through.
And when we changed to learning intentions and success criteria, students were able to articulate what they were learning. And we noticed that they were able to engage a bit better.
Learning is visible to students and students have greater ownership of what they're doing in the classroom and can see those links to the real world.
I'm going to stop there because the teachers are pretty enthusiastic about the work of the 14 parameters and how they really have developed precision in practice in all of their classes. So it just, I think, speaks to both of us about this is a whole system, whole school approach to improvement.
Lyn, can I make just another change comment here? We have sub-strategies, I guess I'll call them, within this change strategies. And one of them that's become very strong is use the group to change the group. Mm-hmm. So when you heard these people talk, it's not us talking, it's them. And they're all like that. They're talking to each other. We set it loose in a way by enabling it to begin. But once it begins, the group is the one we're using the group, not in a negative way, in a positive way, to change the group, because peer interaction is the most powerful because it's up close and it's specific, and hopefully they like each other, so they want to work more together, especially when they get success.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the principal of O'Connor Collegiate, Reg Mentz, really stepped back, and the teacher said, we want to really get together and show this work and what a huge impact it's having on students' growth and achievement. And so you don't see Reg in it. She's leading from behind, which we've learned is an excellent strategy. And using the group to move the group is the other one that really works in our change processes. And as I mentioned, instruction really comes after being assessment literate. So assessment drives instruction. What do you think, Michael? I see some overlap here with your deep learning.
No, it's absolutely right. We have our 4 dimensions of the pedagogy with the new pedagogies being the ones that engage students so much, the linkage to the parents, the use of digital. It's all there, and this is these concepts, collaborative inquiry, very powerful. So these are the common, I guess I'll say, conclusions of the last decade or so. Those what I call succinct, that have to be there, concentrated and focused on, integrated into the day-to-day learning that they do.
Absolutely. And, we always get the question, well, what about the students who aren't learning, the struggling students, the at-risk students? And we really advocate that we need to know who our students are, who the faces are, who are in our care. And to do that, we talk about parameter 6 as being really non-negotiable. How do we know our students, who they are, and how to teach each one? So we talk about parameter 6 as being the case management approach. And that approach is 2-pronged. Data walls in private places. And I can't say this enough. In private places, they're for rich discussion about who the students are and what are their next steps in instruction, and how can we as teachers and leaders, ensure that they are teachers and leaders are understanding students' instructional starting points and how to bring them on. And the second part of parameter 6 is, of course, the case management approach. So it's not just about data walls. It is about knowing the faces of our students who may be struggling, they may be stuck, or they may need extending. And then from that data wall and through the rich discussions, we come to a meeting which is focused just on instruction. And the student does not come, the student's work comes and represents. So the classroom teacher brings the student through a piece of student work. And this is a meeting for practitioners, leaders, and teachers. This is not the kind of meeting that we do often to identify students with special needs. So this is not for parents and for the cast of thousands. That's a different pathway. This is for us to come together as few as 3 teachers, or 3 people. It might be the principal, the classroom teacher, and a knowledgeable other, talking about the student through that piece of student work and how can we move this student? What practices, what might we try that we haven't tried before? So this is an important part of our work in knowing the faces. So to me, data walls and case management meeting, that's data. And we often talk about big data, and I want us to also consider that student work is data, and it's powerful data.
Lyn, can I just mention something about feedback? Because I study feedback in other domains. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. A lot of the change insights are what I call nuanced. And the one about feedback, to put it succinctly, is you need to combine candor/specificity with voluntarism. Yeah. In other words, increase the clarity and specificity of the feedback and reduce the judgment and imposition of it. In fact, most people, when the context is that relational, they will actually voluntarily take good feedback because they recognize it. They get disturbed if you start judging it and imposing it in that. So a lot of this is the subtleties, or what I call the nuance of change, but it works when you combine those two, you get the results.
Yep, absolutely. And, when I think about that case management meeting, I think about people coming together, wanting to improve this student's pathway. And so it becomes a collaborative session talking about pedagogy, what's working, and what can we learn from each other, and let's give this a go. So together, that combination is very powerful. Candor and volunteerism. I love that. Thanks, Michael. It really defines descriptive feedback, which we see both at the data wall and in the case management meeting. So in chapter 5, we talk about the 3 dimensions of leadership. And I go on in other books to talk about other dimensions of leadership. But these are the dimensions that our research participants listed in table groups as the top 3 that they think are important to do the work of faces. So they talk about being knowledgeable. So leaders need to be knowledgeable. They need to first be teachers and know how to work alongside teachers. They also talked about mobilizability, and that's the ability to really focus on that culture of learning and ensure that all folks have a say and their voices are heard in this work. And that they come together collaboratively and build consensus towards school improvement and system improvement. And then the last one, which really didn't have as many participants talk about this, but we think was probably the third piece of research results, and that's the ability to sustain the work. And we don't often think about how to keep the work alive when we're long gone, we've gone off to teach in Hawaii or wherever. How do you sustain the good work that's happening? And of course, that that really started with the work of Philip Schlechte and talking about developing leaders, tapping people on the shoulder, developing other leaders so that you're not alone in this work. You have a guiding coalition. You have a strong sense of a leadership team to do this work together. So for us, we say one step forward, maybe 3 steps back. It's never an even journey, but it is the journey.
Yeah, the underscore I would make, and compatible with this, is I often use and write about the concept of lead learner, which means that you model learning. That is, you are a learner. You're not dominant. People see you. We call it. Some people call it being an apprentice and an expert at the same time, depending on the issue. So you have to model learning. That's one thing, and then you also, I think, have to be able to develop leadership in others at the same time. And one way of putting it is I guess I'd put it this way: when you retire from a particular position or leave 5-6 years later, the mark of impact should be not only how much you've impacted student learning, that for sure, but also how many good leaders you left behind who can carry on even more than you did. So it's lead learner modeling, and make sure you develop in others. Be humble, but be an expert. Don't hide your good ideas. It's coming together in these kind of 3 concepts, I think.
Absolutely. And we also say, leave your position title at the door. We're all learning together. So in the Clarity Learning Suite, we have a role called the learning leader, which is that concept you've just described, Michael. Learning alongside is my favorite new phrase. So when we think about leadership, there are tools in FACES for leaders and teachers to use together to really look at system and school improvement. Right?
Only 8 things you have to do well in a continual cycle.
And the 8th one's the best one, and that's celebrate. So celebrating the small wins doesn't have to be a huge win, but for us, both in our work, everything is a collaborative inquiry. We're always thinking about what will be our next step. I think in our collaborative inquiry circle, though, we're looking to leaders and teachers together to actually write up the findings and develop case studies about what's working in terms of your collaborative inquiry. The other tool for leaders is certainly something we talk about, learning walks and talks in the last chapter of our book. And I want to be really clear that we've decided these are absolutely not evaluative. They're an opportunity for us as leaders to become even better instructional leaders. And you can't really do that until you get into classes and see what's going on in your school, in your system. And that really is a data collection through asking students the 5 questions that we then can plan our next steps in our professional learning. So what's important to me is that that assessment waterfall chart we talked about really aligns with those components down the middle. The 5 constructs align with the 5 questions for students on the left, and also the 5 questions for teachers when they're planning on the right. So we've added this particular graphic to the book because it really brings together the importance of being assessment literate and asking students the 5 questions to see how clear they are about their learning.
So and I saw somebody signed in there from Lismore, so that's where this was co-created, I'm going to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Australia.
Thinking. And we only, in Clarity, looked at 5 questions in the alignment for students. So Lismore helped us, their guiding coalition and team helped us see that the 5 questions for teachers also relate to being assessment literate. So that particular graphic, if you're following through on your FACES books, will be on page 214. We also looked at Wellington Point high school, state high school. And what's important about this one, also in the last chapter of our book, is that they have integrated deep learning and the 14 parameters. And so this is just a quote of what they're doing to integrate our work. They're considering the sustainability and the scalability of delivering deep learning beyond their at-risk students to right across their very large school. And they're also focusing their work on their least served learners by introducing what we say are non-negotiables, parameters 1, 6, and 14 concepts into their deep learning work. So certainly very exciting to see this secondary school teachers and also the region, Southeast region in Queensland, bringing our work together.
Yes, I underscore it. So go ahead. Culminating event. What we do at the end of a given sequence.
Absolutely. And we celebrate, as I mentioned before, small wins. Doesn't have to be huge, but it celebrates how we've learned to put faces on the data and teach each student and what the leadership is that it takes to do that. So for us, the Learning Fair, and we had many in York Region and across Ontario. So what we know is this is about knowledge mobilization. This is about sharing what we've learned with others and others taking the work and making it their own, given their own context. So you'll see that as well as on page 183 to 203 in your FACES book if you're following along.
One of the, just on the culminating event, it had a lot of people need to use this, and it's not, it's very focused and specific. It occurs periodically. And in fact, we actually, I guess I'll say, created the Learning Fair, and not created it, but used it most fully in York Region in the first decade of the century. And the Learning Fair just gave everybody a chance, multiple wins from it, because almost every group is participating. They get a chance to present what they've done and get feedback on it. They get each other's knowledge, so there's a knowledge specificity component, and they get to celebrate. And I'm working in another school a few months ago, and the principal said, "We did all of this, and we did this celebration." And those few people who weren't on board, it was very uncomfortable for them to see all this celebration when they didn't feel like part of it. We didn't want to make them feel badly, but we wanted them to share in it. So the celebration has really, as long as you don't overdo it, has multiple goals. It's a kind of single action that has about 4 contributions in one action. Absolutely.
It kind of brings us to thinking, Michael, about the integration of our work that you wrote about in FACES.
Yeah, we don't have time today to do that, other than to make the point that the FACES work and the deep learning work are compatible, number one. Number two, they actually overlap in direct ways. And that if you think of the literacy work itself, we want the literacy to be focused on the 6 parameters of character, citizenship, collaboration, communication, so forth. And because all of the pedagogies parallel, and the way in which you treat data and accountability, all the change things are totally overlapping. But expanding from literacy to the competencies, the 6 competencies, I think, is what we need to do now to get to the next phase of what is the purpose of education. How to link well-being and learning comes about when you get into those competencies, and how to integrate them and make them have the greatest use under the conditions we're facing now. The conditions we're facing now, obviously disruptive, almost giving society a nervous breakdown, but also raising and showing us clearly that well-being matters. Yes, ill-being is what we are suffering, but well-being is really not only a powerful thing to have, but it's tied to learning, and the learning is tied to problem solving, which is climate change, social distance between people, collaboration, things that we need to accomplish as a society. So I'm feeling that this is the beginning of a new era when we talk about 2023, the next month, actually. That's got to be a new era that broadens the use of this material and gets into the integration really of well-being and the kind of learning we're talking about this evening.
Absolutely. I think that's so important that the 14 parameters is our strength and our framework, but it doesn't stand separately from well-being. Well-being and learning must come together. And I think we see this both as an equity and excellence issue. So for us, our work just signals the fact that things are going to refocus on those faces. They are going to focus on learning, on well-being, and well-being not only of our students, but our teachers and leaders as well. I think we feel when students demonstrate growth as well as achievement, we have been successful. And just thinking about the conclusion of our work, faces and faces on the data, what great leaders and teachers do is a very powerful motivator indeed. And I hope we showed that, and the specificity and the practicality of the tools in faces to motivate you to not only know your students, but how to teach each one, how to move them forward, and also motivate your teachers and leaders and how to move them to ownership of their teaching, their learning, and of course, their faces. So Jared Mowbray, one of the directors of education that we work with, says faces is our forever work. And I certainly think that is very true. This work is timeless.
So we've arrived at our due 15 minutes at the end, and we're going to help. We're going to get some help from Morgan, who has been looking at the chat group, and she will pose. She'll pose, and we'll respond to questions that she selects. There's probably, 100 in there, and we're going to get a printout of. I forgot to ask Morgan, but I'm sure it's okay. We'll get a printout of the chat, and we'll use that as data. The way the questions are asked always give us insights because they think of things that we don't do that. So, but let's try a few of those in the next 10 minutes before we close. So we turn it over to you, Morgan.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lyn and Michael. I've got a few in here, but if anybody has any more questions, feel free to throw them in. Our first one are the 6 competencies you talked about at the beginning: creativity, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, citizenship, and connectivity for the future of education.
They actually are for the present and the future. We have a whole bunch of schools from 20 countries working on them with us to co-develop it, and they became gradually more and then rapidly more popular since 2015, when school systems we knew before COVID weren't working very well. 2/3 of the students were alienated or not connected and all that stuff. So the xxiii started to make it relevant and development. And so I think it's got to start in a whole bunch of schools. And the more that not only COVID, but the realization that schooling wasn't working, how do we get a transformation of schooling, not just this or that program? The big problem and issue we have right now, the big opportunity, I think, is that those 6 C's can be foundational, and they are in the district we're working with. And they do, as the questionnaire implied, represent the next nature of the role of the school system. The role of the school system, the purpose actually is not academic development only. It's development of belonging, purpose, humanity paradigm, we call it, impact on the world. So it's all coming together now, all needed right now. It's going to be tough the next year, but it has, I think, the potential to accelerate positivity within the next 2 or 3 years, and then to go from there even more.
And I think I might add that, those 6 C's align absolutely with parameter 1, the faces of our students, and also parameter 14, the ownership of the work. And I would think when we're looking at the 6 C's and moving from literacy and numeracy to critical thinking, we want to think carefully about how our pedagogy in classrooms is discovery focused. So we might start with a wicked problem and develop that assessment waterfall chart as we go through the steps of collaborative inquiry.
Thank you. The next question we have is, Lyn, as you have said, data today is instruction tomorrow. Keeping this in mind, and if you can narrow in, what are the most important factors to consider when using data to inform instructional decisions?
Right. So for me, when I say data today is instruction tomorrow, I think about classroom practice, and the data today is the student work. It's the student voice in the classroom. It's the questions students are asking and the answers students are giving. That's all data, and it must inform the next steps in our instruction. So I see a key part of our instruction never being stand-up recitation, but always that teacher on the move, meeting with small groups of students, guiding the instruction for students who aren't really understanding the concepts in our classroom, whether it's a discovery approach or it's using the gradual release. So for me, that data collection is the teacher's observations, students' work, that really informs the teacher's next steps of who needs to fly and be left alone in their discovery, who's stuck and needs a light touch, and who is really struggling and will come with the teacher for absolute instruction the next minute at the guided table, a small place in the room where the teacher reteaches the lesson in a different way, not in the same way. I always say, because it's not louder or longer in the same way, it's in a new way, so that the student gets it, because the students didn't get it the way it was taught. So there's always differentiation in the classroom, given the data that the teacher is gathering.
Thanks for clarifying, Lyn. Next question, can you comment on perceived tension between literacy and numeracy learning and engaging in deep learning?
Was there in that question, is there a tension between literacy and numeracy as a subpart or not?
Yeah.
You want to take that one, Lyn?
Okay,
and then I'll take the other part.
I don't think there needs to be a tension. I think we need to learn one from the other. So for me, literacy learning includes mathematical literacy. So our definition is it begins with the foundational skills: reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, representing, and doing mathematics. And it becomes critical thinking, communication, problem solving. So when I think about teaching reading, writing, viewing, representing, I think about the lessons we've learned from that we can apply to mathematical literacy. And I think there are some specific ways we use the 3-part math lesson to teach mathematics, but we haven't moved away from that assessment literacy. Even if we start with a wicked problem and we go through the 3-step 3-part math lesson, we end up with a congress at the end of our lesson that brings together the assessment literacy pieces. So what are we learning? Why are we learning this? How can we be successful? What are the I can statements? So I'm thinking that that there is some very strong similarities in teaching literacy and mathematics. However, for mathematics, you want to start with that discovery question, that wicked problem, and move through the waterfall chart upside down, if you will, because we don't want to tell students what they're learning before they discover what they're learning.
The other question, the difference or the tension between literacy and numeracy on the one hand and deep learning on the other hand, is the question of the day. We need a whole seminar to deal with that one. because the answer is yes and no. The yes answer is if you pursue literacy and numeracy independent of deep learning, it's attention. If you pursue deep learning independent of literacy and numeracy, it's attention. And it's easy to do it independently. So that's the one. But we also know and that you need to have those two things feeding on each other. I think one way of saying it, if you just did literacy and numeracy and you didn't do deep learning, you could get good at learning, but not good at life. If you just did deep learning, you would get better about the life aspects, but you wouldn't have the expertise on the learning side. So we actually have, and I can just recommend a concrete example, the Ottawa Catholic School District in Ontario has 83 schools actually, and they have the whole system, which is performing magnificently on literacy and numeracy and magnificently on the 6 Cs because they've integrated them. Integrated them is sophisticated. So you can't take an easy road out and say, I think I'll just do that and catch up the other later. You better think of both of them from day one.
Absolutely. And I just want to say there are 3 phrases that I think can help us. It begins with, and those are the foundational skills of literacy and numeracy. It becomes the deep learning. So the problem solving, the critical thinking, the communication, the citizenship aspect of learning. And then the third one is evidenced by. And that's what we in FACES talk about. What's the evidence that this is making a difference for our students? So begins, becomes, and is evidenced by, I think is a good framework to think about. Not attention.
So then on the heels of that, it leads right into the next question. How do you help teachers achieve assessment literacy? In my experience, this requires deep learning for most educators.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we start small, we think big. So that's a Michael phrase, think big, start small. And my phrase is success breeds success. So we start with early adopters. And we grow, as Michael said, use the group to move the group. When we see that there are some deep understandings happening in some classrooms, we're doing learning walks and talks, and we're asking teachers who are those early adopters if they'll reach out and work with a small group of teachers that aren't quite there yet. So I believe that the most successful part of this work is when teachers are teaching teachers.
Just a comment on the definition of assessment literacy. I want to give a slightly different positioning of it because it's clearer and more powerful for me, at least. There is when you become assessment literate, you gain pedagogical power. In other words, you're better at your trade, at your effectiveness. But you also gain political power because now, if there's a wrong debate about assessment, you're more of an expert. You can hold your own in that debate or carry the day. So in the schools I'm talking about, like Ottawa, they're very good at the pedagogical assessment literacy and the political assessment literacy, and they feed on each other. And it really decreases their vulnerability to external criticism. Because once you get good at something and you can hold your own in it, you know more than the people who are criticizing you, but also if you have the political power, the parents like it, the people like it that are part of the community, you've got a pretty solid base. You've got the expert base and you've got the political base, and when those two feed on each other, you're pretty safe and pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I would certainly add to that the example of O'Connor Collegiate is certainly one of those examples. There were some people who were sitting back just watching, and it was those people that actually had the evidence, the teachers who had the evidence that this work was making a difference, became the leaders, and people were drawn to them because they wanted to see. So they opened their classrooms. They wanted to see the evidence. What does this look like? And I really believe there's an article by Emmerling et al. Who talks about in their research, if teachers don't see what you're talking about, they'll never adopt it. So that's why I think it's important as we progress learning walks and talks that leaders take teachers along to look at the evidence, what's working. And we have those cross-school learning walks and talks too. We're looking for evidence and we're walking with teachers who have that conversation. What's working? What makes a difference? What's the evidence?
Okay, how are we doing? I think we're heading towards the wrap up here. This is a great start.
I see one question that I'd love to answer. What's a wicked problem? It's just kind of floating in front of me here.
Yeah.
So for me, a wicked problem is it's all about rich performance tasks. It's all about higher order thinking, that critical thinking. It's questions that begin our any session, but certainly in mathematics, where there's no one right way to solve the problem, and students from solving the problem in pairs, many different ways, come up with their I can statements that are the success criteria for the work. And I also noticed another one that said, it's our forever work. Somebody said, yes, it's our forever joy. How good is that?
That's pretty good. Last point I want to make, if I can, I did an op-ed for Ed Week about a month ago that's called Student as Changemakers. We're kind of thinking about changing the system, but the point about it, and there's six reasons why I said it, built into that 2-page op-ed, is that students as learners become really engaged in wanting to make changes as well, because there's so much wrong, so much to be done. And it's better that we have them skilled to be able to do that. So I think there's a great rich vein in the next period to have students as change makers in what we've been talking about for this last hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Student voice and teacher voice. It's the center of our work. And leader voice, I guess. I love the change in our title, what great leaders and teachers do. It's about everyone being a leader. And students as well. Students are the best change makers.
Yeah, we see it.
And that's to us parameter 14, 1 and 14.
There we go. Thank you so much, Lyn and Michael. I think everyone would agree that was a great presentation to learn from your expertise and what you've learned as well on how to support teacher voice and student voice and leader voice. And I want to wish everyone a good evening, good morning, wherever you are, and a good rest of your week.